It looks like there is indeed a turtle far up ahead. Observing the Hawaiian sea turtle, what struck me immediately was just this grandiose mass with such dramatic textures in the skin wrinkles, in some of the patterning, the sagginess of the skin in the neck. This turtle barely moved. I think once she lifted her head for about a second, but that was pretty much it. I don't think I've ever painted a subject from life and had so little movement over such a long period of time. It ended up being very practical, actually. I did a quick base of light gray marks with the brush pen markers. I've always appreciated with brush pen markers that there is no option to erase. I know for some people that can feel a little stressful, knowing that when you put down a mark, it's pretty much there. For me, it's actually very liberating because I know I can put down a mark, I just move on. And there are opportunities to make adjustments that you would think you don't have. A big part of that is starting with the very, very lightest gray and sticking with that tone for a fairly long period of time. I really don't get to the dark grays until I'm super confident about the sketch that I've done. There's just so many textures and patterns all over the turtle. And so one thing I was very careful to do with the brush pens was to be drawing with them in all different directions. I felt that would really reflect the haphazard quality of all of the various shapes that were involved in this turtle. Because really, the challenge with this turtle is it's just constant subdividing of the shapes. Because you have the bulk of the shell, you have the body, but then within the shell, you have these subdivided forms, and even within those forms, there are more textures and patterns. You incrementally go from the larger shapes and then keep drawing the shapes inside those shapes until you get down to those small details. This really was a very funny scene because you have this one turtle on the beach. There are these ropes, they have all of these cones, and so many signs telling you what you cannot do. These sea turtles are protected under state and federal laws, and one of the signs explained that green turtles are native to Hawaii, can be found in shallow coastal waters of our islands. And so they explain that in recent years, the turtles have begun to crawl out of the sand and rocks to bask and rest, primarily during the daylight hours. This basking is a natural behavior special to Hawaiian green turtles. So often when I'm teaching painting from life, a lot of it has to do with really understanding the gesture. And I thought to myself, can sitting still really be a gesture? And I think it can be, because it's a gesture where you have this mass of a turtle, and really what he's doing, he's impressing that weight up against the sand, and just this idea of basking. He's not just sitting there, he's actually basking in the sun and relaxing. And so even though this is a turtle who's standing perfectly still with barely any movement, he is doing something. So I kept really reminding myself about that I wasn't just drawing a turtle that happened to be just sitting there, but that he was actually doing something that was important to his life. It became a very funny scene after a while because so many people gathered to look at this turtle, and quite a crowd had assembled by about 8 o'clock. And we're all here just marveling over this one animal. I mean, I always find it magical anytime I see any animal. There's something about them which I think is so beautiful and wonderful to observe. And when you see something like this, I mean, it makes me think I've traveled to another period in time experiencing an animal like this. I used an angler brush to apply the yellow ochre, and really I was not using it like watercolor because it's really not what watercolor is well suited for. But I do enjoy watercolor because of its speed. That was a way for me to really quickly just throw in big swaths of color for that background. But also, when your watercolor palette is full of sand, you don't have a lot of options. I wasn't sure initially that I was going to add color, but I felt like the piece just felt very cold with just the black markers. And so I did end up going in with a little bit of yellow ochre in a very opaque way because I felt like if I used it in a very watery manner, it was going to match the markers very well. I really was using this watercolor and this brush more typically the way I would use acrylic. In fact, I almost never use watercolor this opaque. But of course, I didn't bring any gouache, which I feel like I always should. There's always something that I need to clean up with gouache for the future. I was really wishing that I had that at the time to clean up a couple of those areas. And as I did more work with the yellow ochre, I started finding myself using more of an opaque Naples yellow, thickly applied with watercolor to add some of the highlights on the tail. I do often go in and do another pass of marker to fix up some of those little moments. There was one part of the painting that continued to bother me after I left the site. That was this little patch of highlight on the top of the shell. I decided to use white colored pencil. This colored pencil was water soluble, and it made it very easy for me to beef up the highlights and then go in afterwards with a slightly damp brush. And this allowed me to loosen up and soften some of the edges of the colored pencil to make sure it really sunk into the other media. When you add new colors and a new media, it's especially important to add that media in a number of other places. That's why you'll see in other parts of the painting, I've gone in and added colored pencil in other areas all around the shell.